I often think it's interesting because um, my family uh, uh, it's spread out so wide. My mother, by the way, didn't think anything of disappearing to Africa. I mean, it just basically left me with a family. I think, in fact, it's interesting because I think this family that I lived with in near Guildford um, basically were my parents, during my formative years. And I felt like I actually had a family, whereas before I really didn't. And since I really haven't. I mean, um, uh, we cared for my mother when she got sick, and we had that family, but there was no, there was no grandfather there, and that sort of struck me, and my wife had, she had a mother and a father and a whole bunch of sisters. Well, I had a whole bunch of sisters. I had some siblings too, but they were stretched out, Calgary, Seattle. My mother disappeared to Kenya, and then to America. And even when we were living in America, she was always off down to Florida and places. And then often back to look after my sister Henrietta, who had MS. So it was very far flung, and I sort of got used to that, And I think when I read biographies of very artistic people, I see a similar pattern. They're not terribly sociable. They don't have. Their energy goes into their work, into their artistry, and they tend to be not terribly hinged. And certainly my family is pretty unhinged if you really think about it. They're so far flung. They have great talents, but they don't really see themselves as a coherent unit. So that's very. But the more I think about it, I'm very grateful for the talents that I inherited from both my mother and my father and my grandfather. When I read the piece about the philosophy at the readings. That really resonated with me. I sort of hadn't read that for a while, and I'd sort of forgotten about it. And it is actually kind of interesting that what my parents sort of set out, even if they, it was done post hoc, that really is my background. It absolutely is, and I think it's actually more of my background than it is any of my siblings. But that whole notion of bonding with nature, but yet being well-grounded, well-educated. My mother really saw to it that I did that, and she paid a price for that. I mean, a literal price, because she single-handedly sent me to private school, to public school, and I really did get that education that she. And that's lasted with me. That's actually been the savior of my life, I think, because I've never really had to exist on my artistic ability because I was so well trained, and have had a really interesting and long career at it. It's coming to an end now, but and actually I'm actually looking forward to redeveloping the artistic genes that I've got for photography, which is interesting because it's actually things like graphic design, web design, database. It's a combination of the art, but expressed not in writing fiction, or painting pictures, but within a technological framework, which is just fascinating me. And that's what comes out when I remind myself of where I came from and what the Walmsley Society has done to fill in the gaps. That's really remarkable. And I so appreciate that, because otherwise I would never know. It could be just a random event. I don't think it's a random event at all. So it's really interesting how those genes get passed on, and yet I think you just have to admit that people with very artistic talents are not necessarily the most sort of normal kinds of families. And certainly my father and also my mother. It was probably a bad combination. It was almost bound to ultimately to come apart. And I'm glad that in a way that both he and Stephanie found solace in his remaining years. That's actually very lucky. I mean, to marry somebody so much younger than you doesn't always work out, and it certainly seemed to have done. So that's very interesting.
And it does appear from the stories in the books, it sort of appears that anybody married to Leo would be sort of second to him, if you know what I mean, in that
Yes.
his writing and everything. And even Stephanie, she'd had a certain career as an actress. That had to sort of come second. And so do you think that it's this sort of, it's a little bit self-centered, if you know what I mean, and that your mother perhaps had to break away from that to find herself. While she was with Leo, she was just secondary to him, and by getting away, she developed into her potential.
Yes, I still don't know why they separated. I know that the philosophy of education was very different. My mother, ironically, for someone who had such a wild childhood and was such a free spirit, became quite conservative. I think a great deal more conservative than my father. My father really wanted me to go to Dartington Hall, which was sort of an offshoot of A.S. Neil's, the most progressive, do as you want school imaginable. My mother was absolutely determined that I was going to go to a prep school, to a public school, and actually most of her teaching, ironically, was really quite conservative. Conservative in the sense of wanting children to have very, very sound knowledge of classics, knowledge of, in a sense, exactly what the public schools stood for. Character building, Latin, Greek. And that always struck me as a little strange, because when you read, even when I was talking to somebody in Robin Hood's Bay very early on, and she said, I remember your mother, she'd run through the fields naked, and I mean, she had a reputation for being a daredevil, and that was always intriguing to me. Later on, it actually got expressed in having a passionate interest in knowledge, in doing things. She was irrepressibly optimistic. I suspect that my father was not irrepressibly optimistic. I think that, but by the way, I also think that if you had crashed 12 times in a biplane, it doesn't matter how, I am really thinking that my father really was suffering from all kinds of things. And remember, First World War, we hadn't heard of things like post-traumatic stress disorders. They didn't exist, but they did exist. And I think my father actually paid a serious price for his engagement in the First World War. And that may well have played into the tempers, I saw quite a bit of the tempers, and it wasn't just with Amanda's engine. But I could see that, and I think my mother was much more level-headed. As a young couple, they were wild, but I think as they moved forward, I think my mother became much more sensible, and my father became much more, and I think this may be right. I think self-centered. And by the way, that's not an uncommon trait with writers. I've seen this. You can see this in biographies of almost anybody, artists too. It's just they have something that's got to come out, and that's so important to them, and they're not really totally capable of managing normal human relationships. Kind of sad, really, isn't it? It'd be nice to have nice family men, mothers who do everything, and everybody gathers together at the kitchen table, but they both write books and stuff like that. Most of the people that I've met who are really, really great artists are also incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult. Some would argue that I'm incredibly difficult too. Of course, I don't think so. See, that's the problem. The actual people who are, who are the artists think they're wonderful and loving and everything, and do all their things. So I might be, that might be my problem too.
Perhaps portrayed that in his books, the person that he might have wanted to be,
yes,
in some respects, because in his books he wasn't difficult and self-centered and things, was he? If you read the stories of his life with his mother, he doesn't portray himself as such, but perhaps that's the person he really wanted to be.
Yes, I think that's right, and I also think that one of the reasons why my mother, when we read extracts from the book sometimes, and she'd just say rubbish, 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 untrue, lying. See, and I think that's the clue. I think so too. Yeah. And why not? I mean, in a way, it's really interesting that even though Peter Woods made this big thing about he folded in real events into his thing, but it's still fiction. It's still a particular point of view, and it's his point of view, by the way. He did not collaborate with Margaret on these books. It's his writing. Now, if I'm writing, if I was writing about me, which I would never dream of doing, I pretty much take the same line. I don't want to look like an idiot. Although actually, you probably would, you see, because deprecation is the stuff I write. I sort of got this British notion of self-deprecation that's just sort of built into me. I would never want to be a guru or and I'm not interested in it. I'm not interested, and a lot of my colleagues, that's all they're interested in as academics, is to be the best in the world. And I long since realized, one, I didn't have that great ideas, and number two, after a while, nobody wants to read you. Books go out of style. I've even got books that are out of print, and nobody's going to print them again. I'm always interested in the next book I'm going to write because I have some vested interest in it. But I also recognize that maybe it'll sell 1,000 copies, and maybe it won't. But I enjoy doing it. you know, and I hope I've made a little contribution to it. But anyway.
You're still a very English American then, are you?
Mm-hmm.
You're still a very English American then. You haven't got the.
Well, I'm
American...
also not an American.
Right.
I'm still British, and I have a British passport, and I'm allowed to be in the States. Yeah. No, I would never stop being an Englishman, even with my sort of half broken, half American accent. No, I still retain those. Yeah, I have some really strong values that really come from my upbringing, really from my mother, much more so than my father. My mother was a huge influence on me, and I think she lived the life that, frankly, whether she lived it with Leo, I have no idea, but she lived the life as really a single parent, that in many ways I've emulated. You know, a cheerful attitude towards life. I'm very optimistic, and I think she was irrepressibly interested in life, which is what I'm interested in too, in nature and gardening. And I can see now why Catherine is so anxious to redress the, you know, Suzanne versus Stephanie, you know, and after all, most of the really fine writing, not all of it, but most of the really fine writing was with my mother. And it may well be because it was so difficult. I mean, it's a lot easier to talk about things that are, you know, that's a struggle. And of course, breakups are much easier to write about than just ordinary family life. So, it's one of the things that's interesting to me that in Samuel Pepys's diary was hugely interesting because it dealt with the bigger issues of the country, but also his relationship with his wife and his mistresses and his, ordinary life. Gives a huge, you know, a picture of sort of what it was like to be in London, especially in the latter part of the 17th century. And again, that's an interesting thing that spending time in London and then reading Samuel Pepys and spending time in Hampton Court and reading Antonio Fraser's book about Henry VIII's wives is a heck of a lot more interesting than the history that I learned in school. Because there's a place and things that have happened in that place. You stand in the Great Hall in Hampton Court, and it suddenly dawns on you that some of the major figures of English history have been in that very hall. And I go for a walk, along up to Leith Rig, and I realize that my mother and my father courted there. That's amazing to me. And you couldn't help but be, it's emotional.
Yeah, I mean, because you're quite fortunate in some ways that this particular area hasn't changed so drastically.
Yeah, it hasn't changed at all.
So you can go down the village and
yes,
the different shops and the different types of people because they're nearly all tourists.
Right.
But you can read Leo's books and imagine the people there, really, because the buildings are still there, aren't they, for you? So, yeah.
Well, and I think I was walking on the beach yesterday, and I'm preparing for the reading, and the scars are still there, and they've got names to them, which I didn't know about. And I'm thinking every time I come here, it isn't just the location, but it's also the manner in which Leo describes some natural phenomena. That is absolutely extraordinary to me. Son of the Sea, I think, is particularly good. I mean, in the readings we did today, I think just the descriptions of sort of ordinary things is quite extraordinary. You take it for granted because the images of the fishing and the weeds and everything else, immediately you can sort of see them. I mean, you can only just see them in your mind. You can see them. You can see them here in Bay. But the sheer skill in actually writing that stuff is absolutely amazing and timeless. I mean, there are a huge number of people writing in that period that you'd never really want to ever read again because they're so damn complicated. And I think this is one of the reasons why Leo deserves to be republished, deserves to be read. His stuff is absolutely, when it's brilliant, whether he's telling the truth or not telling the truth, the language itself is so evocative of a scene. You're describing some of his early childhood in his father's house. And it isn't just the way that Neville reads it; it's also in the language. I mean, it really helps that it's read so damn well. But that's amazing to me. And you know, I can't read Robert Louis Stevenson anymore because it's so damn even Sherlock Holmes, it's actually very difficult to read because it's not poetic and the sentences are so damn long. Although Leo uses some long sentences, it's still it's as persuasive and compelling now as it was before. And that is remarkable because an awful lot of writers date badly. I don't even like Jane Austen, I'm sorry to say. I find it very difficult to read. And we argue about that because I have two Jane Austen scholars who are friends of mine. So that is remarkable. But I've got a long way to go, but I hope I've got enough life left that I will get through the entire collection. I have not got Tabby Farn's Silver Blim. So it's kind of nice to actually have the collection. And that's nice. That's really good. And it is lovely to be able, I've got, not only have got all of the works, but I've also got first editions and I've also got many of them signed as well. And that's, for me, that it has nothing to do with the reading of the books. It has to do with the fact that, you know, it's actually got, you know, my father's signature, and sometimes to me, sometimes to Anna, and the fact that Anna has graciously decided that, you know, she wants me to have all of her collection too, and so that's very special to me. But it's different from the pleasure that you get from reading particular novels, and it's different also from the pleasure that comes from sort of realizing this man is actually writing about my mother. You know, and even in the later books, you know, with you know, Anger's Moon. Those are really still kind of interesting because I can connect more easily to those because that's all about you know, being in foreign. So that's really neat.
I mean, you keep mentioning Sound of the Sea. We were going to ask what would be your favourite Leo book at the time, at this time.
Yeah. Well, Sound of the Sea is right up there. Superb. I was just thinking though, Golden Water Wheel, Happy Ending. What else? Now, something I was trying to think about just as you were talking that struck me as one that I really love. Yeah, I think Sound of the Sea, I don't know what it is about Sound of the Sea. I'll tell you actually one thing about Sound of the Sea is the opening prologue. It is actually one of the most beautifully constructed, that you have this still photograph and all of a sudden it starts to, it's a little bit like Harry Potter, that the still photographs sort of start moving around. And I don't know what it is about it. It just, I could read that over and over and over again. The other thing I think about the style is, it's actually quite funny because people that review my books tell me that I have a very simple style, that I can write in unconvoluted language and still make an awful lot of sense. I'm flattered that they would do that. But then I also think that in many ways that's what I got from my father. He does have a simple style, because it's in a totally different medium. It's fiction, not non-fiction. So there are huge differences there, and he writes clearly, obviously a lot better than I do. But that simplicity, I think, the clear images. It's not. There's very rarely a word used that you have to look up. Well, except for idiomatic language. He's not pretentious about it. It's actually quite simple, and I think in a way that's something that I've sort of picked up as it's very poetic too. He's able to make very clear, especially in the later works, It may be that the fictionalized accounts of Robin Hood's Bay and the Fisherman would look like that to me if I could handle, if I could get the translated version of it, out of Yorkshire and into, you know what I mean. So maybe that also is actually pretty good, but I get totally confused by the language there seems to me very dated, but it may be just simply because it's Yorkshire. It strikes me as old time, whereas things like the Golden Water Wheel do not strike me that way. But I love that. I'm beginning to appreciate the style. Interesting enough, I think the members of the Walmsley Society were much further ahead than I was. I remember Jack talking about it. Jack Hayes. I had long conversations with Jack Hayes on it. I was thinking, oh God, what the hell is he talking about? But then remember when I first joined the society, when I was into my own career, I was, incredibly busy. I was trying to develop get tenure and all the rest of it. And again, there wasn't the connection, so it didn't mean a huge amount to me. I think Sound of the Sea is probably my favorite, at least for now. That's what I'll go with. It's like Desert Island. Remember Desert Island Disc? Which book would you take with you after the Bible and something else? No, I take all of Leo's books. That's what it probably would take. Either that or a prison sentence. But I'd be allowed to take books into the prison.
If there's one passage in anything that would cause a lump to appear in my throat, it would be what you wrote in Shells and Bright Stones about Leo not expressing to you what he was feeling when he waved you off. When you went to Foyne, you left, and he never burdened you with how he would be feeling to see you go.
Yeah.
And it's the same every time. I think it's
Yeah.
quite touching, that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, part of it, I think, was Leo was really scared stiff of my mother, because the slightest infraction, and my mother would not, and she had the power, by the way. There was I don't believe there was any legal requirement for me to be going down to see Leo. So in a way, he was really tried to be on his best behavior. And I think part of being on his best behavior was not to reveal to me the desperation that he had. And I don't think I ever picked any of that up. I may have been just simply too young to do it. Also remember, going down to the seaside was basically a holiday. You know, being at the seaside, was actually pretty special. And I remember actually, I don't know how on earth this happened, but I remember being in a Buttman's holiday camp, being in a caravan with Stephanie. I don't know how this happened, and because we were having a great time, and the whole idea of being in a caravan was so incredibly interesting. None of my family would ever be in a caravan, and I always thought, so it was a holiday. So if Leo had sort of started getting emotional with me, or start saying, oh, I wish your mother would do this, that, or t'other, he couldn't do that. But I don't think. I think it was more fear that he'd lose me. That he behaved this way. I am sure he must have gone through agonies in thinking about. And I think one of the reasons why Stephanie was engaged, both literally and figuratively, by him was to make everything jolly and happy. I mean, she really was one bundle of fun. Unbelievable. And her father was, what was his name?
Nat Gubbins.
Yeah, Nat Gubbins. And I used to read some of his stuff, and it was hilarious. He was, and apparently her mother was a writer too. So clearly she had some talents in that area, and she was an actress. It was a good choice, actually. I think if he got no frump of a middle-aged nanny, I don't think it would have been nearly as. I mean, Stephanie, frankly, was about my age. I mean, she really was. She acted that way. It was very fun. So it's kind of sad in a way. She's got older. That naturally as we all get older, and she's had some tough times, and of course as Selena too. I think it was because late 50s, I was actually going to Africa to see my mother, and I went at least probably 2 times, 3 times, and then 1962 I graduated from Bradford College, and then I went to teach in the prep school that I was in, and that was pretty much the end of it. I really lost touch with and then I was at Trinity College Dublin when I got a telegram to say my father had died. And it was very unemotional. I remember that. And I think it was because I hadn't seen him for quite some time. And
So you never saw him when he lived in the cottage in Foy, then? You only knew him at the Pontville?
Now the funny thing is that I actually remember the cottage, but it may have been when I went in 1982, we not only came up here, but we also went to Foy. And that was the last time I saw Daphne du Maurier. I'm fairly sure, no, it may have been on an earlier trip. Yes, in fact, it was on an earlier trip. I can't remember when Daphne du Maurier died.
89.
89?
Yeah.
Oh, then it might well have been 82. And I actually have a picture of Daphne du Maurier standing by Menabilia Gates and holding Catherine up. So that was the last time that I saw her. So I suspect that I saw the house that they lived in. I can actually picture the house. I know exactly where it was, but I don't recall them being there. So I'm pretty sure it was after my father died. But it was also before. Stephanie stayed there. Right? She must have done, because Peter Woods, I remember Peter Woods talking about collecting all the stuff that Stephanie had thrown out. Talk about timing. So yeah, I think that's the chronology. It's funny, isn't it, how you can't remember stuff? It's kind of scary.
Like the past is all the past. It seems going to a flatland to me.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to know exactly, the last time you saw him. So it would be then at the creek. So
I think it was at the creek. Yes, and I suspect that meeting with seeing Selena was probably the last time until I saw her at one of the meetings.
Yeah. Well, Selena writes about her mother obviously not wanting a young child to be growing older living up the creek.
Right.
So presumably they moved to the cottage around about 1958.
Right.
That's a bit of a guess.
Right.
Give it 18 months either way. But the thing is, he wrote Sound of the Sea in 1959.
Right.
And I think he wrote Sound of the Sea at the cottage.
That's interesting. It's funny because I thought I was intrigued by that. The Stephanie said she made up the title. I actually had Sound of the Sea pushed way earlier, in his career, and of course the only reason for that was it's all about his childhood. So I thought it happened earlier. Yeah.
Foreigners his first go.
At the childhood story.
Childhood story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I think was.
It's quite interesting to read both of them because they've got different stories in, but he's got a different attitude.
Right.
Which
two?
Foreigners and Sound of the Sea.
Oh yes. Yeah.
They're both his childhood.
Right.
But he's got a different attitude.
Oh yes.
His attitude to Ulrich seems to have softened a great deal in Sound of the Sea.
Right.
Although I like Foreigners better.
Right.
But I don't know why.
Yeah.
It's been very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely marvellous. Thank you,
Oh,
Sean.
you're very welcome. You're very welcome.
It has very
Nice
interesting.
to chat with you.
Because we'll do a still of it for the website. How's that?
Okay.
We'll do a still.
You don't got me in it then?
Yes, by all means.
Go on, Mum.
Right.
All right.
Is that it?
That's good.
Okay.
You just trot over about